Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me. My name is Kristen and I'd like to share with you my currently inked pens for March 2024. The first fountain pen is my Esterbrook SD Oversized in Botanical Gardens. It has a journaler nib and I've inked this one up with an Ink Flight sample, Ferris Wheel Press Hardy Harvest from February 2024. The next fountain pen is my Bennu Euphoria in Earl Grey. It has a fine nib and it's inked up with KWZ Honey. I figured it would be a nice touch to have honey in my Earl Grey fountain pen. This one is my Fountain Telling Charleston. I believe it's a Charleston Slim. It's got an extra fine nib. This is the matte finish of the 3 Olive Martini Blank. And I've got this one inked up with Diamine Safari. I believe that it matches the green in this pen so very well. The next fountain pen is my Aurora 88 Birth of Turin. It has a medium nib and it's inked up with Diamine Velvet Emerald, one of the Inkvent colors from 2023. This one is my Franklin Christoph Model 3 in antique glass. It's got a fine SIG nib. I feel like it's been so long since I've used the SIG nib, so I'm excited to use it this month. I've inked this one up with Venta Inks Carnival. This is my Kaweco Collection Sport in Iridescent Pearl. It has a fine nib, and I've inked up this pen with Pilot Oroshizuku Kujaku. Here's a new fountain pen. The Aurora is a new fountain pen as well as this one. This is my Gutoshi handmade fountain pen. I actually purchased this one from a seller on Etsy. And it has a 1.1 stub nib. And I've got this fountain pen inked up with Parker Quink Blue Black. And this is another new fountain pen, my Esterbrook SD in Lilac. And it's fitted with an extra fine nib. I've got this one inked up with Troublemaker Inks Abalone. This is my Lamy Studio in black with a new section, and I've added a long knife blade to this fountain pen, and I filled this one with an Ink Flight sample from February 2023, Ferris Wheel Press Auroralis. This is my Leonardo Momento Zero Grande or Leonardo Pura in Gray Anthracite. This has a medium gold nib. Oh my gosh, I feel really awkward trying to say it. This fountain pen is inked up with Ackerman Hoffive Gijs. Let me know how I did with that one. We've got another Inkvent color in this one. This is my Pelikan M205 in Moonstone, and it has a medium steel nib. It's inked up with Diamine Moonbeam. So yes, Moonstone fountain pen with Moonbeam ink. And I have to thank Tattooed Cat for inspiring me to ink this one up with Diamine Moonbeam. It seems to be a perfect match so far, so I'm excited about writing with this one. Finally, we've got the Twisby Eco in Cerulean Blue. It has a medium steel nib. And I've inked this one up with the last Inkvent color for the month, Diamine Nightfall. That's what I will be working with for the month of March. So I'm going to test all of these on various papers. I've got Yamamoto Bank paper, Cosmo Air Light paper, Midori, Tomoe River, and Iroful. I'm also going to be testing them out on this Oasis paper, Usari paper, and Tomoe River S paper. Not bad. And there is shimmer, so yay, success. Ooh. With a fine nib. I really like this juicy fine nib. It feels stiff, but I do like the sturdiness of it. And I think the stiffness kind of works with the feel of the pen. I like that. We'll see how well I bond with the color of this ink, but I'm so very curious about this ink color. It feels really nice. This nib actually seems slightly softer. It gives just a tad bit more than the fine nib on the Bennu Euphoria. I'm so excited about this pen. Don't know how juicy it's gonna feel. Whew. Oh my gosh. This is a thick one. Oh my goodness. This is so wet. Oh my gosh. Medium. Medium nib. That's a lot of ink. Oh my goodness. Can you see like how shiny that ink is? That's a lot of ink that I just laid down on the paper from this fountain pen. I kind of love it, but then I'm also wondering, like, would I be overwhelmed with this combination? We'll see. But it looks like a very well-behaved ink in a very wet writing pen. Let me go in cursive with this one. This is the Franklin. Ooh, that was a bit scratchy. It was a bit scratchy on the second line of text when I was writing at an angle. So the ink, Venta Inks Carnival, is not a lubricating ink. I can say that much because I felt it. I felt it all. I'm curious about seeing a dark ink in this fountain pen, because I've seen people use inks like Sailor Manyo Haha and Nekoyanagi and other chromo shading, very light, very pale, very beautiful inks. But I'd love to see this one with something just a little bit darker and a little bit more straightforward, I guess, which is why it landed on Pilot Suzuku Kujaku. Ooh. Okay, so once it started writing, it feels really nice and smooth and straightforward. That's a nice fit. I think it's a nice match for this pen. I've got to keep my eye on whether or not that's going to be an issue down the road. Ooh. Let me test this out and make sure all is well. Okay, yeah, it's inked up. Okay. So maybe I just needed a little bit of prompting, some prompting. No. I gotta keep my eye on the Kaweco Collection Sport as well as this Gutowshi fountain pen. It seems like it doesn't like when I write in cursive, slanted, at a slanted angle. So we'll see about that one. Coming out of this extra fine nib, it seems more of a straightforward blue-gray color. We'll see if I actually end up noticing any chromo shading properties from this ink. It seems like a drier combination, but it is not a super dry combination, so it still seems workable. I've only got 2 to worry about so far. Ooh. I like this desaturated purple color coming out of my black fountain pen, and so it looks like it's an understated black ink, but once you take a closer look, you'll see that it's purple and it also has shimmer. Can I see any shimmer? There's very minimal shimmer, but it's a nice surprise. I really like the personality of the long knife with this ink. Ooh. This feels juicy. Looks and feels juicy. And I like it. It doesn't have, well, I was going to say that it's not showing as much personality as I was expecting, but the more I look at it, the more I like it. I like it. There's not very much shading going on, but that could also be the fact that this is a very wet combination, and so it's laying down a lot of ink. With a medium nib. I love the shading in this one. Yeah, I really like the color of Hofeivergijs, but I really love the shimmer that I'm seeing in Diamine Moonbeam. All right, I got one more to go. Ooh, Moonbeam is looking beautiful. Okay, so I've got some wet writers and some dry writers this month. Ferris Wheel Press Hardy Harvest seems to be somewhere in the middle of wet and dry. KWZ Honey in this Binu Euphoria is like a wet fine. I might not see very much shading in here, but I may. I don't know. Diamine Safari seems like somewhere in the middle of the road with in terms of wetness. Diamine Velvet Emerald in this Aurora medium nib is a super wet, super juicy combination. Venta Inks Carnival and my Franklin Christoph is somewhere in the middle, but closer to the dry side of things. Pilot Suzuku Kujaku. This is a nice and lubricating combination, but the Kaweco is still a dry writing fountain pen, so we'll see how that one works long term, because I definitely had some problems trying to get it started. And the same thing with my Gutowshi handmade fountain pen. It took a bit of prompting to get that one started, but once I got it started, it was pretty reliable. We'll see if I can have a pleasant writing experience in cursive. I prefer to write in cursive with my stub-like or italic style fountain pen nibs. Troublemaker Inks Abalone. I can see just a tad bit of some chroma shading properties with this combination, and it looks really nice. It doesn't feel too dry or too wet, so it seems to be a pretty amicable combination. Ferris Wheel Press Aurealis looks and feels really nice in this Lamy Studio Black with a long knife nib. I really think that this long knife is helping me out with this ink. Ackerman Hofeivergijs is a nice neutral gray. I like it. I wish that I could see a little bit more shading because it seems a little flat, but I'm also okay with it being a pure gray. No bells, no whistles. It's just reliable and super juicy. So yeah, this is another one of those juicy combinations. Moonbeam looks so good. I love the shimmer on Moonbeam. I'm enjoying the shimmer, the sheen and the shimmer on Diamond Nightfall as well. They both have like this cool toned shimmer, Moonbeam and Nightfall, and so I really like the combination. I really like both of these. I love the combination, how well Diamond Moonbeam matches up with Pelikan M205 Moonstone. Diamond Nightfall in my Twisby Eco with a medium nib. That is a wet, combo. So we've got 1, maybe 2, 3, 4 super wet nibs or wet combinations. And the ones that are a little bit dry that make me just slightly nervous, I guess I could include Hardy Harvest in this one. Hardy Harvest, Venta Inks Carnival, Pilot Roshizuku Kujaku, Parker Quink Blue Black. Yeah, so those are the ones that are actually concerning me. And the others, like KWZ Honey, Diamond Safari, Troublemaker Inks Abalone, those seem to be just fine. So I don't have too many concerns about them. And I hope that they will continue to be like really nice and well-performing pen and ink combos for the month. That's my first experience with these fountain pens. I'm going to go ahead and write the same thing on these 4 other sheets, as well as the 3 additional notebooks, and I will be back soon. All right, so I am back with all of my writing samples completed. It was an interesting experience. So here we've got Tomoe River paper, then Cosmo Air Light paper, Yamamoto Bank paper, this is cream Midori paper, and Iroful paper. The papers that I enjoyed using the most were actually Midori paper and Iroful paper. Tomoe River paper was fine. That was the first experience that I had with these fountain pens. Some of them still needed to like wake up just a bit. They had a couple hard starts, and the Pelikan M205 was just slightly hard starting right there as well. I had a better experience with the inks on Cosmo Air Light paper after I had gotten all the pens and inks to work on Tomoe River paper. So this was good. This is the Yamamoto Bank paper. This was probably my most frustrating writing experience so far. After having used Cosmo Air Light paper, this paper felt thin. Like I could actually feel the surface of this wooden of the wooden desk. It was not very pleasant to write on as far as like the cushion of the paper. There was no cushioning here as there was with the Cosmo Air Light paper. There were a few inks on here that just did not want to write at all. I don't think I really enjoyed the Franklin Christoph fountain pen with the Venta Inks Carnival at all. I also did not enjoy the Troublemaker Inks Abalone. That had actually started to skip over here. That Pelikan M205, it looks like there is so much shading here that it's almost like it's skipping, but it's not skipping. There's just like extreme shading down here. And I don't know if this extreme shading and the difficulties that I had with this one and Diamond Moonbeam, I don't know if that just had to do with the fact that these are relatively drier inks, like in comparison to the others, or if there are like hand oils on this paper by the time I reached down here. I'm not sure, but I did my best to protect the bottom of the page as I was writing these, as I completed these writing samples, but sometimes things happen. In general, the inks definitely look warmer on the Midori paper. As far as the ink colors go, I of course always enjoy, or most of the time I enjoy, the colors on Iroful paper, and today I like it. And now that we see all of these ink colors and writing samples together, you can see that this Diamond Velvet Emeralds coming out of the Aurora 88 is quite a broad looking writing sample. Even though this is a medium nib, this looks and feels like it's a broad nib. This medium nib in comparison to the Leonardo medium nib and the Pelikan medium nib and the TWSBI Eco medium nib, this is still much broader than all of the other medium nibs that I'm using for the month. I felt a little bit restricted trying to stay within a 5mm grid, and I felt even more restricted when I went down to 3 to 4mm grid on this new Tomoe River paper. I actually really like the first 3 ink colors on the cream Midori paper because they're such warm colors, and then putting them on the warm Midori paper is just, it looks so nice. The Ferris Wheel Press Hardy Harvest, it felt like really gritty and scratchy on the Yamamoto Bank paper, but otherwise it was a pretty normal writing experience. The shimmer on this ink is actually really nice. It's not one of those in-your-face ink colors or shimmer colors. It's very subtle and very pleasant most of the time. KWZ Honey in this Benu Euphoria smells good. It's just a really nice sensory experience. I enjoyed this ink on Yamamoto Bank paper because I actually saw much more shading here, and I enjoyed the writing experience the most on Iroful paper. And it looks warmer and it's slightly lighter on these than it does on the Cosmo Air Light and Tomoe River papers. Diamond Safari looks a little bit lighter here on the Yamamoto Bank paper. It's a bit darker and slightly desaturated on these three papers, Tomoe River, Cosmo Air Light, and Iroful papers. On the Midori paper, it has a little bit more yellow coming through because it's on that cream paper. Diamond Velvet Emerald was just so wet. That is a wet ink in a wet pen. I feel a little bit like I'm restricted in these smaller grid sizes, and I had so much fun letting loose in my notebooks that actually have taller line heights. Venta Ink's Carnival. This Franklin Christoph feels like it needs some help. This is a relatively dry ink. It seems like it's a struggle coming out of this Franklin Christoph Sig nib. I'd like to do some more testing with this fountain pen and ink combination because sometimes it felt nice and other times it felt a little bit too dry, and it also felt like there may be some skipping in my future just based on the dry feel of this combination. Pilot Iroshizuku Kujaku in the Kaveco collection in my iridescent pearl fountain pen is really nice. This was really smooth. I enjoyed it on Cosmo Air Light paper, on Yamamoto Bank paper, Midori paper, and Iroful paper. It was a really, really smooth, really seamless writing experience. So much so that I feel like Iroshizuku inks would just be so wonderful in this pen from now on. I would love to just use Iroshizuku inks in here because I feel like it solved all of my problems with Kaveco fountain pens. So instead of it feeling like it's a dry writer, it just feels like the perfect pen. So after this writing sample, it just worked over here and it felt wonderful. This Kotoshi handmade fountain pen in ebonite. Sometimes it was wonderful and other times it was a struggle. So it was a struggle on Tomoe River paper. It was really nice on Cosmo Air Light paper. It was okay here on the Yamamoto Bank paper. It was a struggle. It was a struggle on this Midori paper because there's like a little bit of texture here. It didn't do well on Midori paper. But I really loved it on Iroful paper. It just felt like the Iroful paper was encouraging it to write properly, to behave. My favorite experiences with the Kotoshi fountain pen, they were on the Cosmo Air Light paper and the Iroful paper, which is not a surprise. Troublemaker Inks Abalone looks different on these two papers. It looks more like a gray on Midori paper. It looks a little bit more teal here on the Bank paper, and it has like this blue-gray color on Tomoe River paper, Cosmo Air Light, and Iroful paper. I loved the writing experience on Iroful paper. It wasn't bad on Midori paper. My best or my favorite experience was here on Iroful paper, and it was pretty good on Cosmo Air Light paper as well. Ferris Wheel Press Auroralis was really nice. I really enjoyed this ink inside of the Lamy Studio fountain pen, and especially with the long knife nib. I like the character that it gives this ink, and that shimmer is pretty cool as well. It's nice and reliable, nice and consistent, but then again, I need to use this with like a full page of writing to see exactly how consistent this ink is, because with me agitating it every time I picked it up for a new sheet of paper, it worked perfectly. I want to see what that looks like long term. Ackerman Hofeivergijs looks like a really nice gray ink. I enjoyed it here on Iroful paper. I really liked it on Midori paper, even if it's a little bit warmer here on the cream paper. It looks really good here. It looks really good on all of these papers. I enjoyed that ink on all papers. Diamond Moonbeam down here. Sometimes it worked and other times it just felt like maybe it won't work all that great in every situation. So it had me thinking that this is a relatively dry ink. So not like a dry ink, not a dry ink and not a super dry ink, but it's closer to the dry side than it is to the wet side. And I came to that conclusion based on my experiences on the Bank paper. There was high shading here, so much so that it felt like sometimes it wasn't going to lay down any ink at all. So I'd have to be careful about the papers that I use and the amount of hand oils that I transfer to my papers with that ink. And the same thing with Troublemaker Inks Abalone and probably Venta Ink's Carnival as well. So these are like the drier ones that I might need to keep my eye on. Diamond Nightfall is juicy. This is such a cool ink color. We can go ahead and take a look at the shimmer in Diamond Moonbeam as well. That's a pretty cool ink color. Diamond Nightfall is really nice. Currently, it seems that there is so much shimmer in this ink that I can barely see the red sheen. It reminds me of like nighttime in the country. Yeah, nighttime in the country where there are no street lights, no pollution, no nothing, and it's just so many stars out at night that you can barely see, that you see more stars than you do the night sky. I like how that looks. I wonder if the shimmer is going to be this strong throughout an entire writing session, or if it's gonna lighten up over time. So those are my experiences on the loose leaf paper. Let's take a look at the notebooks. Here is the Usari notebook with an 8mm line height. This notebook is one I really enjoyed even more, some of these writing experiences. So the Ferris Wheel Press Hardy Harvest in the Esterbrook Estie with the journaler nib was really nice. Look at that shimmer here. It's pretty cool. KWZ Honey smells so nice, and I actually kind of like the color of the ink here. The paper is more of an off-white color. It's not like a pristine white, but it makes KWZ Honey look really good. Diamond Safari was surprisingly smooth on this paper. One of the things that I was worried about was some of these finer nibs, whether or not they would be super feedbacky experiences in these notebooks, and actually they performed really well. This was really smooth, and the same thing with the Esterbrook Estie extra fine nib, that was pretty smooth as well. And the Kaveco collection with this fine nib was beautiful. I like the color of Venta Inks Carnival in here. This warm white paper makes Venta Inks Carnival look really, really nice. Troublemaker Inks Abalone, I can actually see a little bit more of the chromal shading properties in here. And so there's a hint of purple, but it's still mostly blue ink. Ferris Wheel Press Aurealis looks really nice. Ackerman Hoffive Reis looks good. The same thing with Diamond Moonbeam. These two inks look like they are so very similar to each other. It seems that the Ackerman ink is a little bit more neutral than Diamond Moonbeam. And Diamond Moonbeam also has shimmer particles. So here, take a look at Nightfall. There is a wall of shimmer here. That shimmer is pretty strong in that ink. In this Oasis notebook, this is cream paper. Let's compare the two colors. I really enjoy how this cream paper warms up the first three inks. Hardy Harvest, Honey, and Diamond Safari. These are really nice. Again, Velvet Emerald looks really good here. Venta Inks Carnival. This is when I started to realize that the cream paper is making or transforming Venta Inks Carnival into the ink color that I really, really enjoy. So if we take a look at these two side by side, it's slightly more blue on the Iroful paper than it is on this cream Oasis paper. And even though I really did enjoy the writing experience here, I love the color here. Pilot Shizuku Kuchaku looks good, smooth as ever. Parker Quink Blue Black in the Gutoshi fountain pen was skipping a bit, and you can actually see just a little bit. I see the gap between the two tines whenever I write with this stub nib. Troublemaker Inks Abalone looks a little gray here on the cream paper. Ferris Wheel Press Aurealis looks nice. Hoffive Reis and Diamond Moonbeam, they both look good. Diamond Nightfall also looks great. And I just want to take a closer look at these inks on the new Tomoe River paper. Hardy Harvest looks good. KWZ Honey looks great. I really like how these finer nibs look on this smaller grid paper. Like, it's just so easy to use these with a smaller grid. It was a struggle with the Aurora 88 medium nib, and it was also a struggle with the Ferris Wheel Press Aurealis. It almost started to look like I wouldn't be able to read much of my writing with this fountain pen until I actually started writing at a higher angle. This is like my typical writing angle for this fountain pen, and in this grid I actually had to write a little bit taller or at a little bit higher angle so that my writing would still be legible. So this is with a lower angle, and then the higher angle gave me thinner lines. And so that is how I kind of worked this writing into the grid. I think that's everything. The fountain pens that I am most shocked by, I guess, would be here. I'm surprised at how thick this is. I'm surprised that I'm not as happy with this combination as I had hoped. I'm surprised that this is such a wonderful writer. I'm actually surprised a little bit about this one, just a tad bit, at how well this combination works. Yeah, so everything else seems to be as expected, or at least good enough. I'm curious to see how these fountain pens will fare throughout the month. I want to get back to cleaning out the pens that I know I'm not going to enjoy. So This one, I'm gonna keep my eye on that one. I'm gonna keep my eye on this one. And I think that might be it for now. Those are the two that I'm really worried about, like how they're going to perform in my everyday writing. But everything else seems to be pretty well matched. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for sticking with me. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video. Have a great day. Bye-bye.